Have you ever seen a web animation on CodePen or any website and then you think, "Oh, that is awesome! I want to do that!" but then think it's complex and far beyond your skills? Well, I'm here to tell you, nope, it definitely is not. I'm Ahmed Sadek, a full-stack web developer and freelancer with more than 7 years of experience, and I want to welcome you to my CSS Animations, Transitions, and Transforms Creativity course. CSS animation is quickly becoming an essential design tool that's increasingly used to help our users understand and interact with our websites. It's definitely the next big step in CSS. Absolutely amazing things can be done with it. It's literally up to your imagination. It gives life to your website and enhances the user experience. And you know, better user experience means a higher reputation and more satisfied visitors. So CSS animations, transitions, and transforms are critical skills for any web developer nowadays. And I'm here to make sure you learn it the right way. So in this course, you'll master CSS animations, transitions, and transforms starting from scratch. And not only that, we're also going to get our hands dirty and create many examples together so that you'll get tons of ideas and lots of inspiration to help you create any complex animation that you can think of. We'll start by looking at the CSS transition property, learning what it is and how it can give life to HTML elements. Then we'll move on to CSS transforms, which open the doors to many creative options, from moving elements around the page to scaling and rotating them. So we'll talk about all the transform functions that we can use in 2D and 3D environments. After that, we get to the fun part. We'll use all the techniques and properties we learned about the CSS transforms and transitions, and we'll start building some creative examples that'll give you inspiration and help you make full use of what you've learned. We'll start this section by creating some button hover effects, then some image hover effects, and so much more. Then we'll move over to CSS animations and keyframes, where we'll learn everything about them and all their properties. And finally, we'll move on to the last section of the course, where we'll be creating many CSS animations examples that'll kickstart your imagination and help you create any animation you can think of. By the end of this course, you'll be able to understand how any web animation works. And you'll have created more than 25 different examples with different ideas that'll help you increase your creativity and stand out from other web developers. So, if you're as excited as I am, hit the enroll button and let's dive right in with this CSS animations, transitions, and transforms creativity course. Hello everyone, welcome to this lesson where we'll be talking about CSS transitions. So first of all, what is the CSS transition property? And what can it do for us? Well, transition is a CSS property applied to a specific element to make other properties of this specific element change smoothly over a given duration, or animate it in a nice way when hovering over or, for another example, focusing on that element. Let's look at an example of what I mean here. In my HTML, you can see right here I have a simple button. And here in my CSS, I've added some styles to the button. You can see I just changed the height, the width, and the font size to make it bigger, changed the text color to white, and removed the border, then added a blue background color. And you can see in the browser, here is our button. Now, let's add a new CSS declaration. So I'll go right here and say button on hover, meaning when I move my cursor over the button, I want to change the background color to green. Now, if I go and hover over my button, you can see the blue background color changes to green. And when I move my mouse away, the background color returns to blue, but you may have noticed that this change from blue to green is happening so fast, it looks like an on and off switch. It feels pretty mechanical. I think it'll look much better if this change happens more smoothly, and that's exactly what CSS transition can do for us. So we said that the transition makes the change of the CSS properties occur smoothly over a specific period of time. In order to define a transition, we need to use at least two things. The first is the CSS property that will change from the initial state to the final state. The second is the duration, meaning the amount of time that this change will take to complete. Makes sense, right? So in order to do that, we need to declare two CSS properties. The first one is called the transition property, which is the property you want to apply the transition to or make change smoothly or nicely. In this case, it's the background color. And the second one is a transition duration, which is the span of time that the property will take to change from the initial state to the final one. Let's say 1 second. And now when I go and hover over the button, you can see that the change occurs smoothly in a nice way and is much better than before the transition was applied. And when I move away, the background color returns to blue nicely. Now, the transition duration property can accept milliseconds as well as seconds. For example, I can change this 1 second to, let's say, 3,000 milliseconds, which is actually 3 seconds. And when I hover over the button again, the change should occur in a longer duration. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will continue talking about the transition property and the other options we can deal with when using it on our HTML elements. Now, besides the transition property and the transition duration that we talked about in the last lesson, and remember we said that they are necessary for the transition to work on the elements, we also have two additional properties that we can use to take further control of our transition, and those are the transition timing function and the transition delay. First, the transition timing function simply refers to how the change in the property will occur. For example, will the background color begin to change slowly at the start of the transition duration and then faster at the end? Or will it change at the same rate throughout the transition period? Those questions can be answered by the transition timing function. Now, the transition timing function has 5 different values that we can use. First, ease, which is applied by default if you don't use the transition timing function. What it does is it makes the change start slow, then go faster in the middle, and then slow down a bit before the end. Second, linear, in which the change will occur at the same rate from the beginning to the end throughout the transition duration. Third, ease in which the change starts slow and then speeds up before the end. Fourth, ease out, which, unlike ease in, starts fast and then slows down at the end. And finally, ease in out, in which the change starts slow, then speeds up in the middle, and then ends slow. It's kind of like ease. There isn't that much difference between them. Great, so let's see those in action. I've got 5 transition timing function values here in my browser, and I have a demo for each one of them. Now, the property that will change here is the position of the div. So when I hover over any one of them, it will move a specific distance horizontally, and then return to its original location when I hover away, like so. Now, before viewing the different values, let's take a look at them in the code editor and see how we created this horizontal movement. So here in my HTML, I have a div with a class of container, and then inside of it, I have 5 children divs, all of them having the class move that is using the CSS to add the general styles for all the divs. And every one of them has a specific ID, so that we can change the transition timing function according to that ID. So you can see the first one has an ID of ease. Its transition timing function will be ease. The second one is linear, then ease in, ease out, and ease in out. And when we go to our CSS, here we have selected the move class and added some generic styles to make the divs look better, like some margins, width, height, padding, and so on. And here at the last line, we declare the transition property, which is the translate that is responsible for changing the location of the divs from the left to the right over a transition duration of 3 seconds. So if we look here at the end of the CSS file, you can see that we're targeting all the divs. And when we hover over them, they will translate, or in other words, their location on the page will change. They'll move 900 pixels on the x-axis, or horizontally, and 0 vertically. This is a transform property that we'll learn about later in the course, but I want you to know that this will just change the location of the div 900 pixels to the right when we hover over it. Above that, I've targeted each div with its unique ID and added the 5 different values of the transition timing function. So here, I've added ease for the first one. linear for the second, and then ease in, ease out, and ease in out. So to wrap things up, what we are doing here is simple. We just said to the browser, when I hover over any div, I want it to move 900 pixels to the right, and I want this change or this movement to happen smoothly over 3 seconds. And I want each div to move differently. So the first one will move differently from the second, which will move differently from the third, and so on. Alright, let's go back to the browser. And when I hover over ease, which is the default, you can see it starts slow, then gets faster, then returns to slow before the end. And when I hover away, it will also return slow, then fast, then slow. But for linear, if I hover, you see it goes at the same rate throughout the duration time. It's moving at the same speed for all of the 3 seconds. And ease in, slow at the beginning, then faster at the end. And when I hover away, it returns slow, then faster again at the end. Ease out, fast at the beginning, then slow at the end. And when I hover away, it returns fast, and then slow again at the end. Ease in out, begins slow, then moves faster in the middle, then slow again at the end. Alright, now the second property that we'll talk about in this lesson is called the transition delay, and it simply represents the time the transition waits before it starts. It accepts time values in seconds or milliseconds. Now, here in our HTML, we have the button from the first lesson. I think you remember that when we hover over that button, the background color will change from blue to green, like so. Now, let's go back to our CSS. I'll go right here below the transition duration property, and I'll add transition delay to seconds. And now, when I hover over the button, it should wait 2 seconds before the change in the background color starts. And that is simply the transition delay property. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we'll continue talking about the various transition options that we have. So in the previous lessons, we learned that the transition makes the change in a specific CSS property occur smoothly over a specific value of time. But can we use the transition on more than one property? Meaning, can we make more than one property change smoothly? Well, the answer is yes. Here in my CSS, I'll go right here and add color, black. So, when I hover over the button, I want the background color to change from blue to green, and the text color to change from white to black. Now, let's view this in the browser. I'll hover over the button, and you'll see that the text color changes fast with no transition. So, how can we apply the transition to it? It's so easy. Back to our CSS. I'll go right here and add a space, then another transition property, which is the color, of course. And now, when I go back to the browser and hover over the button, you can see that the text color changes smoothly along with the background color. And we can really extend this, meaning we can change as many properties as we want. So, for example, let's go to our CSS. And I also want to change the width of the button to, let's say, 600 pixels when I hover over it. And I'll go up here and add space, then width to make it change smoothly. And when I go to the browser and hover over the button, you can see that everything is changing together nicely. And in case you need to change many properties, let's say 5 or 6, and you think that it'll be hard to write all of them here, you can simply remove them and add the keyword all. By doing this, all the properties will be included in the transition. So let's see that. You can see nothing changes. Great! Now we've learned all the CSS transitions properties that we can work with. But there is a shorthand property that we can use to mix all of them in one single line, and it's just called transition. So I'll remove these 2 lines, and I will add transition, then the transition property right here. I'll transition the background only, then a space, and the transition duration of 3 seconds. Those are enough for the transition to occur, but if you want to add the other properties, then add another space and add the transition timing function. Let's say ease in out. another space, and the transition delay at the end. Let's say just 1 second. And when we view that in the browser, you can see when I hover over the button, it will wait 1 second, then start the change in the background color over 3 seconds. And again, we can choose more than one property. To add more than one property in this short method, we use a comma to separate the various properties. So I'll go right here and add a comma. Then I will add the other property I want to change, which is the color. Then the transition duration. Let's say 2 seconds this time. And then the transition timing function. Let's say ease. And finally, the transition duration. Now, we want to do something cool here. We want the change in the text color to start after the change in the background color finishes. So we should add a transition duration of 4 seconds, 3 for the background transition itself, and 1 for its delay. So back to the browser. I will hover over the button and you'll see that the background color changes, and then after that, the text color begins to change. And of course, we can add other properties. So I'll go back to our CSS and go right here, remove this new width, and add a new property. Let's say border radius. 50%, so the border radius will change as well. And then I'll go up here and include this in the transition. And add a transition duration of 4 seconds, then ease out for the transition timing function, and then 6 seconds for the transition duration, so it'll start after the first two properties finish. So when I go back to the browser and hover over the button, you can see the background will change, then the text color, and finally, the border radius. And of course, we can use the keyword all if we want to just animate all the properties together. I'll remove all of this and just say all. Then the transition duration of 3 seconds, and then ease in. And finally, the transition delay of 2 seconds. And when we view that in the browser, you can see all the properties are changing with each other. But did you notice? Now we can't control the transition delay like we could in the previous method because all the properties are now starting and ending together. So, that's it for this lesson, and I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone. In the previous lessons, we learned what a transition is, how it works, and all the available options and syntax we can use in a transition. If you remember, we said that the transition animates the change in CSS properties over a specific duration. But not all the CSS properties can be used with transitions, because the change in these properties doesn't happen gradually. It just changes from one state to another without any intermediate values. Properties that are not animatable are ones like background image, because it can't change gradually from one image to another. Display, as well, is not an animatable property. And there are many more, like border style, position, float, background repeat, font family, and so on. On the other hand, the animatable properties are those that can be expressed by numbers, because the browser can calculate or interpolate intermediate values such as width, height, border width, padding, margin, line height, opacity. You got the idea. We can also animate the properties that are expressed by colors, such as color and background color. And if you want a resource to find all the animatable properties, the developer.mozilla.org site has a list of all of them. So you can just go to Google and type in what CSS properties can be transitioned, and then click on Mozilla's site, and it'll take you to this list where you have all the animatable properties. Now, in order for you to see these animatable properties in action, I've created this page which contains some of them. For example, if I hover over this div, the opacity will transition like this. So, you can download this file from the resources and test these properties to see how they look while transitioning. Hello everyone, and welcome to this new section in the course, where we'll be learning about 2D transforms. So, what are CSS transforms, And what can they do for us? Well, in the last chapter, we learned about CSS transitions, which allowed us to deal with the CSS properties applied to specific elements and make those properties change smoothly over a specific period of time. But in this chapter, we won't be learning how to control the properties applied to the elements, but we will control the elements themselves, like divs and images and so on. In other words, we'll learn how to change the element's size, shape, and position. And that is what the CSS transforms are all about. The transform property has 4 functions that we can use to control how our elements will be displayed. And those functions are the scale function, which allows us to resize the elements, meaning to increase or decrease their height or width. The translate function, which allows us to move the element and change its position to any spot on the browser, horizontally or vertically. The rotate function, which allows us to rotate the elements in a 2D environment by any degree or any number of turns we want. And the skew function, which allows us to skew the elements along the x-axis or the y-axis. So now, after we see what CSS transforms can do for us and what functions are used with it, in the next lesson, we'll start learning these functions. And we will start with the translate function. So, see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will be learning how to change the position of HTML elements, like divs, images, and so on, using the transform translate function. Now, every time you want to use the transform property, you'll write it like this: transform, then the transform function you want to apply, which is translate for this lesson, and then parentheses, and inside of those, the value for the function specified. Now, let's talk a little about the translate function. Basically, the translate function moves elements around the browser along the x-axis and the y-axis. So, for example, if I write something like this, transform, translate, 10 pixels, 10 pixels, this will move the element 10 pixels to the right and 10 pixels toward the bottom from its original position. So, let's try that. You can see here in my HTML, all I have is an image that we will try all the functions on. And up here, I have some styles to make the image look good when we view it. And if we go to the browser, you can see that the image is sitting here. So we want to change the position of the image, meaning we want to make it move horizontally or vertically. So first, we want to make it move horizontally. We can do this easily by using the transform translate property. So I'll go back to our code editor and target the image. And when I hover over it, I will add transform, and the function I want is translate, and I want to move it horizontally along the x-axis. So I'll say translate x, and then I'll add the value of the distance I want the element to move. Let's say 500 pixels, and let's go up here and add some transitions so that the movement happens smoothly. So I'll add transition, and then the property we want to change smoothly, which of course is transform, and then the duration of the animation. Let's say 2 seconds. Great! So now what should happen when I hover over the image is that it moves 500 pixels horizontally along the x-axis to the right. So back to the browser. And when I hover over the image, of course it will move smoothly 500 pixels to the right. Now, we can also use negative values for the translate property, and it'll work fine, but the element will move to the left, not to the right. So, back to our code editor. And I will go right here and add -500, and when I go back and hover over the image again, it'll move to the left this time. Great. Next, we want to move the image vertically, not horizontally. Easy enough. We'll use translate y instead of x. So I'll go back to our code editor and change this x to a y. So when we use positive values, the image will move toward the bottom. But in this case, we're using negative values, so it should move towards the top. Back to the browser. And when I hover over the image, you can see it moves 500 pixels toward the top. And let's go back to our code editor and use positive 500 pixels. And of course, it will move downward. Now, we can combine these two functions in one function simply called translate. So, back to our code editor. I'll remove this y. Now, the translate function accepts two values. The first value is x, which will move the image along the x-axis. So I will say minus 500 pixels, for example. And the second value is y, which indicates the movement vertically along the y-axis. Let's say 200 pixels. And now, when I hover over the image, it should move minus 500 pixels along the x-axis, meaning 500 pixels to the left, and 200 pixels towards the bottom, at the same time. And just like that, the image is moving horizontally and vertically at the same time. So to wrap things up, translate is one of the functions that we can use with the transform property, and it allows us to change the position of the HTML elements on the page. It can be translate x, which will move the element horizontally to the right if the value is positive, or to the left if the value is negative. Or it can be translate y, which will move the element vertically toward the bottom if it's positive, or towards the top if it's negative. And we can just use translate, which accepts two values, x and y, which will move the element along both axes at the same time. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will learn how to resize HTML elements using the scale function. So the scale function allows us to resize the elements easily. But what do we mean when we say resizing elements? Well, resizing elements means changing their width or height, or both of those aspects. So let's start with the width. We can resize the element's width easily using scale x. So I have the same image from the previous lesson, and I'll go right here when I hover over the image, and I will add transform scale x. And the scale function accepts numbers that indicate how much the width of the element will change relative to its original width. So, for example, if I added 2 here, this will make the image width increase to twice the original size. So if it was 100 pixels, it'll be 200 pixels. And if I change the 2 to 1.5, it'll be 150 pixels. So let's see this. You can see when I hover over the image, its width increases and is doubled. Now I can decrease the width as well. So I can go back to the code editor and use 0.5, for example, which will decrease the image width to half the original, like this. Great. Now to scale the element's height, we can use scale y instead of x. So back to our code editor. I will change this to y, and that should decrease the height to half. Like so. And of course, we can increase the height by using values greater than 1. Let's see what that looks like. So, back to our code editor. I will change this 0.5 to 1.5. And this should increase the height. Just like that. Like translate, the scale function can take two arguments, x and y, where the x value defines how much the element's width will increase or decrease relative to its original width, and the y value defines how much its height will increase or decrease relative to its original height. So, back to our code editor. I'll go right here and remove this y, and add 2, so the width will be doubled, and another 2, so the height will be doubled as well. And the image should be 2 times bigger now. When I hover over the image, you can see it's getting bigger and has this nice zoom in effect. Now, if I go back to our code editor and remove this second value and leave only this first value, this will scale the width and the height together. Just like if we didn't remove the second value. So if I made this 0.25, this should scale the image down to 25% of its original size. So to wrap things up, scale is one of the functions that we can use with the transform property, and it allows us to change the width of an HTML element, or its height, or both simultaneously. It can be scale x, which will increase the element width if the value is greater than 1, or decrease it if the value is less than 1. Or it can be scale y, which will increase the element height if it's positive, or decrease it if it's negative. And we can just use scale, which accepts two values, X and Y, and we'll change the element width and height at the same time. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will learn how to rotate HTML elements in a 2D environment using the rotate function. So the rotate function accepts one value, which is the angle, or the number of degrees, you want to rotate the element by, followed by DEG for degrees. So let's actually try rotating our image. I'll go right here and add transform, rotate, and let's say 20 degrees. So what this will do is it'll rotate the image 20 degrees clockwise. So when I go to the browser and hover over the image, you can see it's rotating clockwise by 20 degrees. Okay, let's go back to our code editor and try something like 90 degrees. You can see the image is now rotated by 90 degrees. Let's try 180 degrees. And now you can see the image rotates 180 degrees and flips vertically. Next, I will try 360 degrees, which will make the image rotate full circle, then return to the way it was before. Now, we can also use negative degrees for the rotate function, which will rotate HTML elements counterclockwise. So I'll go back to my code editor and change this to, let's say, minus 60 degrees. And now, when I hover over the image, it'll rotate 60 degrees counterclockwise. Great! Now, the rotate function accepts values in other units as well. For example, we can use turns to tell the element how far it should rotate. So if I go to my code editor, remove this, and add 1 turn, and now, when I go to the browser and hover over the image, it'll rotate 1 complete turn clockwise, which is equal to 360 degrees. And we can even use negative turns to make the element rotate counterclockwise. So, for example, let's use minus 0.5 turns. And now the image is rotating a half turn counterclockwise. Another unit we can use with the rotate function is gradients. So 1 full circle is 400 gradients. Let's try those out. I'll go to the code editor and change this to 200 gradients. And now, when I hover over the image, it should rotate a half turn, like so. In the real world, the rotate function is used with degrees most of the time, but I just wanted to let you know about these other units. So that's it for the rotate function. It's really simple. So I will see you in the next lesson. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will learn how to skew elements horizontally or vertically using the skew function. The skew function is like the translate and scale functions, meaning we have skew x to skew elements horizontally and skew y to skew them vertically. Or we can just use skew, and the first value will be x and the second one will be y. Now, skew is similar to rotate in terms of units. We use degrees to determine how much the element should be skewed. Good. Now let's see how it works in action. I will go right here and add transform, skew x, let's say 30 degrees. And now, when I go to the browser and hover over the image, you can see it skews horizontally by 30 degrees. And we can change the skew direction by using negative values. So let's try that. I'll go back to my CSS and make this minus 30. And now, when I hover over it, it should be skewed in the other direction. Now, let's skew the image vertically using the skew y function. I'll go back to our code editor and then change this x to y. And now, when I hover over the image, you can see it skewed vertically. And to make it skew vertically in the opposite direction, we can go back and remove the minus to make it positive. And when I hover over it again, it'll skew on the other side. Now, as we said, we can skew HTML elements both horizontally and vertically at the same time using just skew, which accepts 2 values. The first one is for x, and the second one is for y. So I'll go back to my code editor and make this just skew, and then make it skew by 20 degrees horizontally. and 40 degrees vertically. And now, when I hover over it, you can see it skewing in both directions. Hello everyone! After finishing all the 2D transform functions, in this lesson, we'll learn about a new property called transform origin. Well, transform origin is the point that a transform takes as a reference when it works. In other words, the point around which the transform is applied. So, for example, here in my browser I have two images. I've added transform rotate by 30 degrees to both of them, so when I hover over them, they should rotate by the same degree. But the difference is, I've changed the transform origin of the second image to be at the top left corner, but didn't change anything for the first one. So it only has transform rotate. And now, when I hover over the first image, you can see nothing strange happens here. It just rotates 30 degrees clockwise like we saw before in the previous lesson. But now, I will hover over the second image. Aha! Something interesting is happening here. The image is rotating 30 degrees clockwise, but it's pivoting on its top left corner, which is the transform origin, while the first image is rotating from its center point, which tells us that the center point is the default value of transform origin. Now, let's talk about the values that transform origin accepts. It can accept keywords as one value, like top, bottom, right, and left. So let's try that. Back again to our code editor, and here I have only one image. So when we hover over this image, we want to add transform and rotate it by 45 degrees, for example. And we will go up here and add transform origin top. And now, when we go to the browser and hover over the image, you can see it's rotating from the top center of the image now. Okay, next is a demo for the other keywords that transform origin accepts. So let's see how they work. First of all, we have top. We said that it'll rotate the div around the top center of the element, so exactly right here, like so. Then we have right, and in this case the div will rotate from the center of its right side, exactly right here, like this. Now, I want you to pause the video and guess how all the following divs are going to move. So, pause it now. All right, so bottom, of course, will make it pivot around the bottom center point right here, like this. Then we have left, which will rotate around this point, just like that. Then top right, which will rotate around the top right corner. Then bottom right. Then bottom left. And finally, top left. Now, transform origin can also accept values as percentages. We start from the top left corner of the element. So the first percentage value is X percentage, and when the X percentage is 100%, that means we start from the top left corner, then move 100% across the element width to the right, meaning we will end up in the right corner of the element. And then the Y percentage indicates how far we will move vertically relative to the height of the element. So if it's 100% as well, then we would move downward a distance equal to the height of the element. So our transform origin will end up in the bottom right corner of the element. Now, let's say we want to make the transform origin of the element at the center using the percentage method. So what we should do is put x as 50% and then y as 50% as well. And it should be centered. Okay, let's try this method in action. I will go right here and add transform origin. Let's say 30% to the right, and then 80% to the bottom. And then, when we go to the browser, we will move 30% to the right, then 80% to the bottom. So the transform origin will be somewhere around here. Other values that transform origin accepts are pixels. So you can just say, I want it to move 50 pixels to the right and then 100 pixels towards the bottom. And this will be our transform origin point. So let's try that. I'll go right here and add 300 pixels. So that is half of the width. Next, add 150 pixels, which is half of the height, right here. So now the transform origin point should be at the center. Just like that. So that's it for this lesson, everybody, and I will see you in the next one. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new section of the course. In this section, we will learn how to use some of the properties we talked about in the previous section, but in a 3D environment. Now, the major difference between 2D and 3D environments is the z-axis. In 2D environments, we have the x-axis, which is horizontal, and the y-axis, which is vertical. But in 3D, we also have the z-axis, which is perpendicular to both of them. Now, in order to create a 3D environment on a 2D plane, like the screen of our computer, we need to create something called perspective. You can think of perspective as the distance between our eyes and the computer screen. I think you'll understand it more when we see it in action, but I want you to remember that every time you want to work with a 3D environment, you need to define the perspective first. So, we will start with the translate property. In the previous section, we learned how to translate or move HTML elements, horizontally or vertically, using the translate X and translate Y functions. And now, we want to use translate Z and see what we'll get. So here in my HTML, I have just an image. And I'll go right here and add transform, translate Z, let's say 300 pixels. So when I hover over the image, I want it to move 300 pixels in the Z direction. But we said that before we use any of the 3D transform properties, we need to create perspective. And in order to do that, we use a property called perspective and add it to the container of the HTML elements we want it to transform. In our case, the container of the image is the body. So I will target the body and add perspective. And remember, we said that the perspective is the distance between our eyes, or the eyes of the viewer, and the computer screen. So it accepts values in pixels. So let's say 1000 pixels. And now, when I go to the browser and hover over the image, you see something interesting is happening here. The image is kind of getting bigger. The width and the height are increasing, just like what happened when we used the scale property in the previous section. But actually, that is not what's happening here. What's really happening here is the image is moving towards us. So it's getting closer to our eyes. And that's why it seems larger, but its width and height haven't changed. So now you can think of the z-axis as the line drawn between 2 points. The first point is our eyes, and the second point is the screen. So when we move the element along the z-axis, it will move along this line, and it will either get closer to or move away from our eyes. For example, if I go back to my code editor and change this 300 pixels to minus 300 pixels, now when I hover over the image, you can see it's getting smaller because it's actually moving away from our eyes. I'll go back again and remove this minus. Great. So now, what is the perspective we added right here in the body? Well, before we talk about that, let's actually change it to 500 pixels and see what we'll get. So before I reload my browser, when I hover over the image, you can see the image is getting closer to me by 300 pixels in a perspective of 1000 pixels. So I'll refresh my browser to change to a perspective of 500 pixels, and then I'll hover over the image. And you can see in this case, the image is getting much closer than the first time with this new perspective. And that is because the new perspective is smaller. The distance now between our eyes and the image is 500 pixels. So when it moves 300 pixels towards us, then it will end up 200 pixels away from our eyes. While when we were using a perspective of 1000 pixels, it ended up 700 pixels from our eyes. So it seems smaller. Let's see another example. So I'll go back to my code editor and change this 300 pixels to any value bigger than the perspective, which is currently 500 pixels. So let's say 800 pixels. Now, before I hover over the image, let's imagine what'll happen. The distance between the image and our eyes is 500 pixels, and we want the image to move 800 pixels towards us. So what will happen is the image will move towards us until it goes past our eyes, and we won't be able to see it because it'll be behind us, or maybe behind our eyeballs and in our skulls, which sounds a little scary, but don't worry, it's safe. So when I hover over it, you can see it disappears beyond our eyes. So, to wrap things up, every time we want to create a 3D environment, we have to add perspective to the element container first. And the perspective is the distance between the viewer and the screen. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will learn how to rotate elements inside a 3D environment using the transform rotate function. So here in our code, we have our image, and it's sitting here in our browser. And up here, you can see we have a perspective of 500 pixels because, remember, every time we want to use the transform properties, we need to define the perspective first. So now let's start using the rotate function. First of all, we have rotate x, which will make the element rotate on its x-axis. Then we have rotate y, which will make it rotate on its y-axis. And finally, rotate z, which, of course, will make it rotate on its z-axis. So let's start with rotate z. I will go right here inside the image selector and I will add transform rotate z. Let's say 120 degrees. And I will go to the browser and reload. Now, before we hover over the image, what rotate z will do is it will make the image rotate on its z-axis, which is like a line that passes from the screen to our eyes. So it shouldn't look any different from the rotate function we used before when we were dealing with 2D transforms. So I will hover over the image, and you can see it rotates around the z-axis by 120 degrees. Good. So rotate z actually is similar to rotate, which we learned before. Great. Next, we will talk about rotate x. I will go right here and change rotate z to rotate x. And I want it to rotate by 60 degrees. And what this will do is it will make it rotate on its x-axis, which is horizontal. So I will hover over the image, and you can see it rotates in 3D along the horizontal axis. So, for example, if I go back and change 60 degrees to 90 degrees, then go back and hover over the image, you can see the image will rotate by 90 degrees until it disappears. What's happening here is the image rotates until we can only see its edge, and since it has no thickness, it disappears. Then we have rotate y. So I will go back and change rotate x to rotate y, and change the degrees back to 60 again. Then, when I go and hover over the image, You can see it rotates on its y-axis, which is vertical this time. And that's it for this lesson, everybody, and I will see you in the next one. Hello everyone, welcome to this new section of the course, where we'll start building some creative examples, using what we've learned about CSS transitions and transforms. So, here are the examples we're going to build together. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will learn how to create this nice effect when we hover over a button. You can see that when we hover over it, the yellow background is rotating on the bottom left corner of the link until it covers the whole thing. So, let's start. Here in my HTML, I will just go right here and add an anchor tag and say hover me. Then I will go to my CSS and add some styles. So, first of all, I will target the body and add height 100 VH. Then I will add display, flex, justify content, center, align items, center as well. So what these 3 lines of code will do is they will just center the link horizontally and vertically using Flexbox. This has nothing to do with CSS animation, and if you want to learn more about Flexbox, which is a must-learn for any web developer nowadays, I have a course on that here in Udemy. You can check it out if you're interested. So let's start styling our link. I will target it, then add text decoration, none, color, this nice black color, font family, sans serif, font size, 45 pixels, border, 5 pixels, solid, and our nice black color. Then I will add padding, 40 pixels, and 80 pixels from left and right. Then I will add position, relative. Great. So now, in order to create the nice yellow background, we will need to use the before pseudo element. And if you don't know what pseudo elements are, they just allow you to insert code before or after HTML elements. So I will say a:\before, then I will add no content because we don't want to add text. And after that, I will add position, absolute, and I will add left, 0, then top, 0 as well. Now, we have our before pseudo element, and its position is at the top left corner of the link, right here, because we added left 0 so that it will move 0 distance from the left, or, in other words, it will just stay at the left of the link. And it will also be on the top as we set top to 0 as well. So right now, the before pseudo element is just a point at the top left corner of the link. But in our example, we want it to be a yellow background that takes up the full width and height of the link. So we can do that easily by adding background color, our yellow color, then height, 100%, and width, 100% as well. Good. So now you can see that the before pseudo element is appearing as the background color and taking up the full width and height of the link, just like we wanted. But there is a problem. The yellow background is now hiding the text beneath it, so now we can't see the hover me words. This can be fixed easily by going right here and adding z-index -1 so that the text will show up again in front of the yellow background. Great. So now if we take a look at our demo, you can see that when I hover over it, the yellow background rotates clockwise from its bottom left corner until it ends up horizontally with a rotation of 0 degrees. And in order to get this effect, I will go right here and add transform origin. Bottom left, as the rotation is pivoting on this point, then transform, rotate -90 degrees, so that this will be the initial position of the yellow background. Then I will add transition, transform, 1 second. Now, when I hover over the link, I want to make some changes to the yellow background. So I will add transform, rotate by 0 degrees, meaning return to its original horizontal position. And now, when I go and hover over the link, you can see the rotation degree is now 0. And when I hover away, it returns to -90 degrees. So we only have one thing left to do, which is hiding the part of the yellow background outside the link. This can be done easily by going to link and just saying overflow, hidden. And now we're getting the effect we wanted on our button. Now, we can use the same technique to get different results, which will look pretty nice as well. So let's try some of them. Let's say we want the yellow background to rotate from the bottom right corner, not the bottom left. This can be done by changing some of the properties we added. But first, let's go back to our CSS and remove this line of code so that we can see the yellow box outside the link. In order to make the yellow box rotate from the bottom right corner, we can just go here and change the transform origin to bottom right instead of bottom left. So now you can see the yellow background rotates from the bottom right corner by -90 degrees. But now let's change this rotation to 90 degrees instead of -90 degrees. And now the yellow background rotates 90 degrees. Now, let's go to our CSS and add overflow, hidden again. And now, when I hover over the link, you can see we have the same effect as before, but this time the rotation is centered on the bottom right corner, not the bottom left. Now, I have a little challenge for you. I want you to try to make the yellow background rotate around 2 different points. The first one is the top left corner. The second one is the top right corner. You will only need to change 2 values, the transform origin and the rotation angle. So try that out and tell me if you were able to do it in the Q&A section. Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will create this nice swipe hover effect. So when I hover over this link, you can see the background swipe smoothly from left to right, and the color changes to white. And when I hover away, the background swipes to the left again. So let's see how we can do this. Here in my HTML, I will just add an anchor tag and just say hover me. Then I will go to my CSS and add some styles. I will target the link and I will add some styles to make it look nicer. So I will add text decoration, none, then color, this nice color, font family, sans serif, font size, 40 pixels, border, 3 pixels, solid, and our color, then padding, 40 pixels from top and bottom, and 80 pixels from left and right. Then I will add position, relative, and finally transition, all, 1 second. Now you can see our link is looking much nicer, and we can start working on the swipe effect. So the idea behind this swipe effect is that we will create a before pseudo element that will take up the full width and height of the link. Then we will translate it outside the link, and when hovering over the link, we will remove the translation so that it returns to its place where we can see it. This will make much more sense when we create it together. So I will go right here in my CSS and add a:\before, and then I will make the content empty. Then below that, I will add position, absolute, and then left, 0, and top, 0 as well. Then we need to make it take up the full width and height of our container. So I will add height, 100%, then width, 100%, and I will add background color, our color of course. Then I will add z-index, -1, and I will tell you why we added this in a second. Great. So when you look at the link, you can see the before pseudo element is taking up the whole width and height of the link, and the text has sort of disappeared because it has the same color as the background, so we are not able to see it. So now we want to create this swipe movement from the left. That can be easily done by using the translate function, which I'm sure you remember lets us move the elements around the screen. So I will go right here in the before pseudo element, and I will add transform, translate x, -100%. Now I'm sure you remember that negative values move the elements to the left and positive ones move it to the right. So now you can see the before pseudo element move to the left by 100% of its width, and you can see the text is now appearing right here. Great. So now when hovering over the link, I want two things to happen. I want the before pseudo element to go back to its position, and I want the color to change to white. So when hovering over the link, I want to make some changes happen to the before pseudo element. And those changes are getting it back to its position, so I will add transform, translate x, 0, so that it returns back to its original place. And I want this change to happen smoothly, so I will go up here in the pseudo element and add transition, all, 1 second. So now when I go and hover over the link, you can see the background is moving smoothly from the left to its original position. One thing left to do, and that is hiding the background outside the link. And this can be done simply by going to the anchor tag and adding overflow hidden. So now you can see the background isn't visible outside the link anymore, and we've got the effect we want. Finally, we need to change the text color to white when hovering as well. So I will go to my CSS, and when hovering over the link, I want the color to change to white. And this also will happen smoothly, because we added a transition up here in the anchor tag declaration. So now, when I hover over it, you can see the text color is changing to white. Now, as for the z-index I've added right here, I did this because when I created the before pseudo element and gave it the full width and height of the link, the text was hidden behind it, meaning it covered the text. So, for example, if I go and remove it, like so, then hover over the link, you can see the text will be hidden behind the background. So we added it to make the text appear in front of it, so we can see it. Great. So now that we understand the concept behind this swipe movement, we can modify it easily to get different results. So let's say we want the swipe movement to be from the right side, not the left side. We can do this by changing just one line of code. So here in my CSS, I will change the translate X for the background to 100% instead of minus 100%, so that the initial position before I hover over it will be at the right, not at the left. So when I go and hover over the link again, you can see the swipe movement is now from the right side. And let's say we want the swipe to be from top to bottom. So instead of using translate X, we will use translate Y this time. So I will change X to Y, and we want it from top to bottom. So we will say minus 100%, because negative values move elements upward. And again, I will change this X right here to Y. And now you can see, when I hover over the link, the background swipes from top to bottom. So now I want you to play around with those values and create more effects. And feel free to share what you come up with other students in the Q&A section.